Hey everyone, Brian Zane here with another classic pay-per-view review as nominated by my Patreon backers. And this week, I'm looking at WCW Mayhem 1999 from November 21st at the Air Canada Centre in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. This show was nominated by Magpie's Nest Productions over on patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. Now, if you follow this channel for any length of time, or if you've seen some of my other classic reviews around this time period, then you know I have somewhat of a fascination surrounding Vince Russo and his career arc as the head writer of the World Wrestling Federation and later World Championship Wrestling. I'm really curious to look at these shows from around this time across both companies to see, what the Federation did in the aftermath of his departure, or how the WCW acted when he first arrived, and just trying to see that shift, a paradigm shift, as it were, of Vince Russo going from one company to the next. As the story goes, he famously he didn't give his notice to the Federation so much as he just signed with WCW and left in the dead of night, basically, while most of the company was overseas doing a show in the UK. Russo and Ed Ferarra moved to WCW to become the head writers of that company. And so, like I said, Halloween Havoc was the first show under his rule, but, he was filling in, basically. He came in very shortly before that pay-per-view, so didn't really get a chance to really implement his vision on that show, with some exceptions. But I think Mayhem 99, the next show he did, the first of two WCW Mayhems, by the way, and the inspiration for the Mayhem game of the same name, put out by EA that same year, this is his real chance to really implement his grand vision and his design as the head of creative in WCW without having to deal with any of that pesky previous storylines from the previous booking committee. And I know some of you are going to look at this video and go, oh, Brian Zane's going to just take more shots at Vince Russo. He's just like Jim Cornette. He just keeps burying Vince Russo and bashing him every chance he gets. Like, look, here's the thing. It's not a controversial statement to say that a lot of what Vince wrote around this time in either company did not hold up very well, did not age very well. We look at things through the modern lens in this channel. We always try and add some modern perspective to things. That's kind of what I do with these reviews. So yeah, when I'm comparing Russo's writing of the time to the times of today, yeah, I might be a little negative at some points. I might be a little critical of some of the things he does. But I've said before in this channel, and I'll say it again to those of you who didn't hear me the last time, I am glad that Vince Russo wrote during this time period. I am a fan of his because if it were not for Vince Russo writing for the WWF in 1998, I don't think I would have become the fan that I am today. I would not have become as obsessed with wrestling as I was in my teens because I wouldn't have seen some of the stuff he was putting out. And yeah, a lot of it doesn't hold up anymore. The adult me looking now goes, I don't think I would have liked that stuff in the modern times, but the teenage me loved it. So, I give Vince Russo a lot of credit, and I know some people aren't going to be that kind to him, but I'm willing to acknowledge the fact that while I appreciate some of his work as a writer, there's also other stuff that's not perfect because nobody bats 1,000 in booking, no matter who it is. So understand, for the Vince Russo stans out there who think that anything I say remotely critical about him is me trying to bury him, it's done out of a place of love and out of appreciation for what he did. But I think it's irresponsible to look at these past things and not try and be a little critical and be a little analytical of these things through the modern perspective, because it's a very incomplete review. It's like playing without a full deck, basically. So if I were to ignore some of the more interesting or critical things about his work, then what am I even doing? So here's what we know so far. At Halloween Havoc, Sting won the World Championship after beating Hulk Hogan, who just laid down in street clothes for him, and that was that. It was more, what's a shoot, what's a work. Later in the night, we have an unsanctioned, what's billed as a non-title match between Sting and Goldberg. Goldberg wins the match, but is still declared the new champion. An angry Sting drops the referee, and the next night on Nitro, we find out not only is he still the champion, but now he's been stripped of the belt. So a long way to go to get to that point. So a 32-man tournament's been announced to determine a brand new champion, which will conclude at Mayhem. And one of the real defining characteristics of this tournament from week to week was almost all their matches ended in interference. In fact, if you go look at the Wikipedia article about this show, the majority of the backstory for all these matches for the show consists of the phrase X cost Y their match in the championship tournament. That's where the majority of these feuds come from if you don't include the tournament itself. Now, I will give Russo credit. I think a tournament like this is a really smart way, for him especially, to establish this new era of WCW under his creative control. Because I think if there's one thing that Russo is particularly known for, it's booking tournaments. Survivor Series 1998, that whole show revolved around a tournament, and that was one of the crowning achievements of Russo's time as a head writer for the World Wrestling Federation. He also booked an Intercontinental Championship tournament after Triple H had to give it up. That belt was won by Ken Shamrock on Monday Night Raw. Not to mention his experience booking King of the Ring tournaments while he was head writer, and there's probably a few more of these tournaments I'm forgetting, but tournaments is something he was known for. He liked doing that every once in a while. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Russo to go to that well once again in WCW. 13,839 people packed the Air Canada Centre, drawing a gate of nearly $314,000. Not sure that's American or Canadian though. A .45 buy rate. Tony Schiavone and Bobby Heenan are on commentary, and they advertise 12 matches on the night. 12 matches! What is this, WrestleMania? The show opens up with the first of 2 semifinal matches in the World Title Tournament as Jeff Jarrett, the chosen one, takes on Chris Benoit. Now, as I mentioned in my last classic review of No Mercy in 1999, Jeff Jarrett's final Federation match was at that show against China for the IC title. After he lost the Good Housekeeping match, the next night on Nitro, he re-debuted for WCW, and of course this is after Vince Russo already made his way there, so he was in good hands. He called himself the chosen one. He said he had all the stroke in the company, playing onto the fact, but not necessarily being so blatant about it, that, Jarrett and Vince Russo were rather good friends. And so the idea was that Jarrett was going to get all this help from the powers that be. Another interesting point about this time, during Vince Russo's early run in the company, he was not an on-camera figure for a very long time, but for the first several months of his run, in the first part of his run in WCW, he was the powers that be. He was just a disembodied voice that hung out behind a desk in the locker room, and you heard his voice talking to wrestlers who were just kind of looking at the camera, basically, and he was still there, but he wasn't as Vince Russo. He was the powers that be, this kind of mysterious entity, even though people already kind of knew, who were in the know, knew what it was. So Jarrett's very close with the powers that be. He's kind of doing his bidding, and that's basically the gist of how he got this far in the tournament. Benoit, by the way, wearing some special maple leaf adorned tights, them being in Canada and all. I thought he missed a big opportunity having some red tights with the white maple leaf on it, but that's just me. Benoit with the advantage early on, hits a superplex in the first couple of minutes. On the outside, Jarrett runs Benoit crotch first into the corner post. Jarrett working over Benoit really well, and one of my favorite things about this match, it's something we actually don't get for a lot of the show as time goes on, and I'll get to that, but the crowd at this point in the show just comes alive anytime Benoit does anything in the ring, whether he gets the slightest hope spot or the biggest comeback. It's just like the crowd just comes unglued for him, which is really cool to hear. The two trade sleeper holds before Jarrett hits a jawbreaker out of one. Benoit hits the triple Germans, a kick out, and out come Creative Control. They're the muscle for the powers that be. Patrick and Gerald, a very thinly veiled dig at Pat Patterson and Gerald Briscoe in the WWF. They are, like I said, the muscle for the powers that be, and conversely for Jeff Jarrett, helping Jarrett out a lot up to this point. And by the way, they are the former DOA, the Harris twins, Jacob and Eli Blue, what have you. Great pin attempts are exchanged. Benoit with a back suplex, hits the diving headbutt and goes for the cover, but one of the members of Creative Control pulls him off. The referee is distracted and the other twin beats up Benoit. Jarrett hits the stroke, but then Dustin Rhodes shows up with the crowd to make the save. A big brawl happens at ringside. Jarrett's got his guitar, but Benoit grabs it from him and El Kabongs Jarrett instead. We can see how easily these gimmick guitars break, considering at one point as they're fighting for it, one of the corners of the guitar comes down on the mat and it just immediately crumples down. But anyway, Benoit pins and wins. He will advance to the finals of the tournament. Right afterward, Jarrett and Creative Control beat Benoit down some more, but it's broken up by security. I give this one 3 stars out of 5. I think it's a really solid opening matchup. Nothing too fancy, nothing too crazy, but I think it's well executed. A bit of a cluster at the end there with the finish. Get used to seeing that happening a lot in this show, but yeah, a pretty solid way to open the show. Backstage, Mike Tenay is interviewing Disco Inferno about his upcoming Cruiserweight title defense. Lots of audio problems, can't make out half of what they're saying, but Jarrett and Creative Control beat Disco up on the way to the back, and Conan and Jerry Only of the Misfits help break it up, so good for them. That Cruiserweight title match is up next as Disco defends against Evan Karagias, who's accompanied by his on-air girlfriend Medusa. And not only is the belt on the line, but apparently 25,000 of Disco's own dollars are up for grabs as well, because apparently Disco needs that money because he owes the Mafia a lot. Enter Tony Marinara, the future Tony Mamaluke in ECW. He debuts here in WCW, and apparently he's just kind of a runner, or he's a member of this unnamed crime family. And apparently Disco put a lot of money on Duke to win the national championship that year. $45,000 is what Tony says on commentary in this matchup. So basically he's in deep, and he owes the family lots of money. And so basically he's kind of like, Tony Marinara is kind of following him around, basically making sure he can make his money back. That's why why he is here, and we'll see where that angle goes after this matchup. My favorite part of this, though, is, Disco, he just got beat up by Jarrett in Creative Control. He can't make it out there, and so his music's playing, and you cut to the back and see Tony Marinara just kind of like berating Disco to get up and fight and everything. So as Disco's like crawling and selling like mad to get to the ring, like Evan Karagias just runs down the ramp and just hits Disco and just starts beating him up. No sportsmanship from Evan Karagias here. It's not a really exciting match, unfortunately. Like I've talked before in previous WCW reviews about how, how underrated of a worker Disco is, and I know how good of a high flyer Evan Karagias was as well, but we don't really see any of that from either guy in this matchup. To me, it's very stilted. They don't really get out of their first or second gear for a lot of the part. The only real flying move that I see Evan doing is at one point Disco's doing an axe handle off the apron, and Evan catches him in midair with a dropkick, which is very impressive, but the crowd's kind of hard to please here. We get a bit of a boring chant in this matchup. On the outside, Disco puts the moves on Medusa, and she slaps him. You'd think there'd be a greater sense of urgency for Disco here, because not only is his belt and all the money on the line, he's also, he also has the mafia breathing down his neck. You think you want to just focus on the match. The focus has always been a constant Achilles heel for Disco, is being able to focus on the match. Then Tony Marinara, who's been doing commentary like I mentioned, he starts putting the moves on Medusa. He shows off his lovely watch, which seems to distract Medusa. She's very into shiny objects, it seems, but Evan gets jealous. Disco grabs a chair, but accidentally hits Tony with it. The springboard crossbody on Disco back in the ring. Evan wins the Cruiserweight title and the 25 grand. Boy, did Disco step in it now. I give this one 2 stars out of 5. Like I mentioned, this match didn't really play to either of their strengths. Felt like it was kind of a slow match for these guys, and I think the match quality suffered as a result. Also with the outside factors of Tony Marinara and Medusa and all that stuff, just kind of dragged the match down a little bit to me. But the big story here is Evan Karagias is the new Cruiserweight champion, and he would actually hold it until Starrcade when Medusa beat him for it, and she became the first female Cruiserweight champion. The first of 2, by the way. The second was Jacqueline. In the powers that be lair, not Vince Russo berates Jarrett for losing and says he has until the rest of the night to prove himself or consider the favors over. Jarrett calls him a Yankee in response. Elsewhere backstage, Mean Gene interviews Norman Smiley. The self-proclaimed hardcore warrior is ready until he gets spooked by some clanging metal.
Brian Knobbs isn't ready for what I'm going to do to him tonight.
Whoa, wait a minute.
In a match to determine who will be the first ever WCW Hardcore Champion, Screamin' Norman Smiley takes on the nasty boy Brian Knobbs, who's accompanied by his manager Jimmy Hart. Now, one of the trademarks of Vince Russo as a creative force, love him or hate him, question his methods all you want, but something I think he always did relatively well, or at least he tried very hard to do it, was to give all the mid to lower card guys something to do, whether it be some kind of wacky storyline or some kind of gimmick change. And you could take this as a good or a bad thing, but one of the first things Russo did in WCW was make Norman Smiley kind of this wannabe, kind of lucky hardcore legend. He was basically convinced, Norman was convinced that he was a hardcore brawler after somehow beating Bam Bam Bigelow in a hardcore match in the first round of the World Championship Tournament. So he began wearing a lot of sports, football pads and hockey pads and stuff, trying to protect himself at all costs so he wouldn't get hurt. And of course, he's so terrified of everything, like we saw in that backstage promo earlier, but somehow he's backed himself up into a hardcore championship match with Brian Knobbs, who he and Jimmy Hart have taken exception to the fact that, Norman Smiley considers himself this hardcore guy, because it is Brian who is the hardcore guy. Did you not see him throwing around the rubber shark at Bash at the Beach 96? Norman is dressed to impress the Toronto crowd, wearing a Maple Leafs jersey under his pads. Knobbs starts off hot, hitting Norman with a broom and a trash can. Smiley avoids a splash, though. He intercepts a Jimmy Hart trash can and goes to town on Knobbs with the can and a hockey stick. Knobbs clocks Norman after the big wiggle, just slamming the trash can into his head. We'll see a lot of scary looking head trauma for Norman in this match as well. Norman comes back with some bin lid attacks. They make their way to the outside, up the entrance area, backstage. Another unsafe looking attack to Norman's noggin. Knobbs throws Norman through a table. Norman rolls Brian into a big PlayStation sign. They're brawling in the food storage, people. Jimmy Hart's throwing cups and pasta or something onto Norman. Jimmy Hart's role in this match is so hilarious. He really doesn't need to be there, but the fact he's there and he's kind of in the wings, just trying to get involved however he can, throwing the food items at Norman Smiley was a pretty top-notch choice. The two men brawl their way into an elevator. Norman mounts Brian and hits some punches as the door closes. Jimmy wants to open it back up, and in that time, as the door's been closed, the two have actually switched positions, so now it's Brian who's on top, but Jimmy doesn't realize it. He decks Knobbs on accident. Norman covers Knobbs to win the championship. Although Knobbs hits one more snug shot to Norman's head from behind with the trash can after the match is over, before he hucks Smiley and Jimmy into the bread. Oh, that poor, poor bread. I give this match 1.5 4.5 stars out of 5. It is a big, silly, at times sloppy as hell brawl, but I have to give them points for what I think is a very creative finish that they pulled off perfectly. And I think just Jimmy Hart in general in this match was a joy to watch. His shtick, waiting in the wings and everything, and getting involved in the finish, just classic goofy manager stuff, which I love. So yeah, Norman Smiley is the first hardcore champion. He would be the longest reigning hardcore champion in company history at 51 days. But well, after losing the title, he would retain a lot of that kind of hardcore stylings about him, wearing the pads and whatnot. I think he kept this gimmick pretty much until the closure of WCW in 2001. We get a high package for the Revolution Filthy Animals feud. As part of this feud, Revolution briefly kidnapped Torrie Wilson and also debuted Asia, the world's most obvious ripoff in wrestling history. We then go to a backstage interview with the Revolution. Shane Douglas starts off by putting Asia over in a huge way. Dean Malenko talks about all the what ifs in life, and then Saturn chimes in saying, what if the dinosaurs were still around? You know, Perry was great here. He's really funny. Like, he's not doing the you're welcome gimmick yet, but he's still a little bit loopy. After that promo, we go to the Filthy Animals elsewhere backstage, and Conan goes, hey, Mean Gene, you want to feel the belt or the hat this time?
Hat, go ahead, feel. That's enough.
Elsewhere backstage, Disco Inferno apologizes up and down to Tony Marinara over what happened in their match earlier. Tony has none of it and says that tomorrow he's bringing the boys. So who are these boys that Tony's talking about that fills Disco with dread? Turns out it's Johnny the Bull and Big Vito, the Mamalukes. These guys would debut the next night on Nitro. They have a pretty good run in the tag team scene for the rest of the company's run. They were multiple-time tag team champions, and I believe it was at least Vito, if not both of them, who became hardcore champions at some point during their run of the company. Disco would become the enforcer of the Mamalukes, kind of an unwilling servant to them to help pay for his gambling debts to the mafia or whatever. But then once Tony Marinara left the company about a month or two after this show, Disco just became their manager overall. We have an intergender 6-person tag team elimination match, say that 5 times fast, as Eddie Guerrero, Billy Kidman, and Torrie Wilson of the Filthy Animals take on Saturn, Dean Malenko, and Asia of the Revolution. Dig that color coordination by the Revolution there. The perpetually injured Shane Douglas on commentary here while he's nursing an arm injury. Malenko and Guerrero fight on the outside. Saturn hits both of them with a beautiful Asai moonsault, followed by a big dive by Kidman. At one point at ringside, Malenko jaw jacks with some Canadian superfan who actually pokes Malenko in the torso with the top of the flagpole. That doesn't look very safe. Torrie Wilson, like I mentioned, she's in this match, but she is clearly the damsel in distress here. She has no wrestling training. She is the least experienced out of everyone else in this matchup, some by great degrees, but yeah, she's definitely the easy target the Revolution want to pick on here in this matchup. She does get some licks on Asia, though, before it's broken up. In the scuffle, she somehow hurts her ankle, and she's on the silence for a very long time, with Eddie and Kidman both checking on her. Eddie somehow doesn't know what he's doing. He shoves Kidman, and Kidman gets rolled up and eliminated. So we get our first music botch of the match after that first pinfall. The match is not over yet, folks. Eddie's by himself in the ring, and Conan also leaves for some reason. Asia with a huge stalling suplex on Eddie here. Eddie's able to stay in it, though. He eliminates Dean Malenko. Asia grabs Eddie from behind. Saturn goes for a super kick, but he hits Asia by mistake. Frog splash onto Asia, and she gone. We get our second botched music cue in the match. Some good work by Eddie and Saturn here. A lovely dropkick and a tornado DDT by Eddie on a kickout. Death Valley driver by Saturn, and Eddie kicks out of that. Eddie gets out of the way of an elbow. He thinks about tagging out, but he doesn't want to get Torrie involved. He has second thoughts, so he goes back into the ring and tries to fight the battle. Eddie hits a cross body off the top, but Saturn rolls through, hits the rings of Saturn, and Eddie taps out, so it's down to Saturn and Torrie. Torrie is able to mule kick Saturn in the groin, but we get a 2 count. Shane Douglas now on the apron. We get this awkward moment between Torrie and Saturn. A low blow from Saturn right into the labia. Saturn wins the pinfall, and so the Revolution comes out on top there. Oh boy. Kind of a tough one to grade here, because on the one hand, the male competitors in this matchup, you know, Kidman, Guerrero, Saturn, and Malenko, their stuff's all great. It's fine. And then, you know, Asia's good in small doses as well, but then I think Torrie, who gets heavily involved in the finish, you know, she really stinks up the joint when she's involved because she is so untrained. Again, I think it's not so much an indictment on her, but it's the people who put her in that position when she really has no business being there. How ridiculous is it, though, that in this finish, where you've got this huge muscular dude and this diminutive, untrained woman in the ring, you have to have a referee distraction for Saturn to hit Torrie with a low blow to win the match. Ooh, what evil heels! Backstage, JJ, CC, and the Sunshine Band aren't done yet on the night. They're beating the hell out of Buff Bagwell back there, just in time for Bagwell's next match right now against Curt Hennig in a loser hangs up the boots match. Oh goody, 2 matches on the night where somebody gets beat up right before the match begins. That's pretty cool. So anyway, the storyline with Curt Hennig at this moment is that he has been given the directive by the powers that be that if he loses a match by pinfall from here on out, he is done with wrestling. He has to hang up the boots, as they say. Not sure what his grudge with Hennig is at this point, but you know, it's neither here nor there. But yeah, Hennig has been spending weeks being able to outsmart the powers that be by either just winning matches or losing them in different ways. Like he loses by countout, disqualification, submission. Like you can't fire me because I didn't lose the way you wanted me to. But no, this match is basically whoever loses, no matter what happens, somebody's got to go. And so Hennig could lose the match even if he doesn't lose by pinfall. Buff's music plays, but there is no Buff at first. Jarrett and Creative Control show up again. They scrap with Hennig for a bit until Buff shows up with a 2x4 and chases them off, not really selling the effects of the beatdown from earlier, and the scheduled match just resumes as normal. With this really awkward looking cutoff where Hennig's on the apron and Buff kind of pushes the ropes ever so slightly and Hennig flies the barricade. Hennig eventually starts working over Bagwell. We get some more boring chants during the match. This crowd very tough to please. Hennig beats Bagwell up for a very long time until Buff gets the boot up out of the corner, hits a blockbuster, and just like that, he wins the match clean as a whistle. So after getting his ass beat by Jarrett in Creative Control before the matchup, and then taking the brunt of the offense from Curt Hennig in the match itself, just one blockbuster and boom, it's all it takes to beat him. Apparently the blockbuster is as well protected as the RKO today, it seems. So I give this one 2 stars out of 5. You know, it was just a weird match. You know, it suffered from repetitive booking, the pre-match beatdown like I mentioned, which then of course didn't factor into the match at all. And then you've got this weird pacing, and it all ends up with a finish that I felt really unearned. It is one of the few matches on this show where you get a clean finish, but boy, it felt weird. Hennig gets a standing ovation, a very touching gesture by the fans in Toronto, a moment that will be totally undone 1 month later when Curt returns and joins forces with Creative Control and the powers that be. Backstage, Mike Tenay interviews Sting regarding his match with Bret Hart, and Sting says if it weren't for the powers that be, he wouldn't have had to fight for the belt he never lost. That match is up next, the second of 2 semifinal matches in the Championship Tournament, as Sting takes on Bret the Hitman Hart. Now, last time I reviewed a match of these two in WCW, didn't go quite as well as I hoped it would, so let's see if we can improve things from the last time. Sting wrestling in pleather pants and a t-shirt on this night. You know what? It's the 90s, I'll allow it. It starts sportsmanlike at first until it breaks down into a fight. Bret with the advantage until a blatant low blow by Sting cuts him off. Fighting on the outside, Sting goes for a running splash onto Bret on the announce table, but Bret dodges it. Bret goes for an axe handle off the top, but Sting is too close to the referee, and Bret takes them both down. And hey kids, you ready for some outside interference? Lex Luger and Elizabeth run down to the ring. Luger grabs the bat, whomps Sting in the leg with it. Bret beats up Luger with the bat for his trouble and puts him in the sharpshooter. The referee gets up and rings the bell. They announce that Sting's being DQ'd for outside interference by Luger, which makes no sense for a couple of reasons. One, the referee was knocked out when Luger attacked Sting with the bat, so how would he have seen it? Two, if he hits Sting with the bat, that means Bret gets disqualified, not Sting. Anyway, Bret says he doesn't want to win the belt like that. He convinces the ref to restart the match. Bret goes for a second rope elbow. Sting puts up the boot. Sting gets the deathlock locked in, but Bret pounds on Sting's injured leg. He reverses the deathlock into the sharpshooter, and Sting taps. I give this one 3.5 stars out of 5. I would have given it more because I think the actual in-ring quality of the wrestling they did was far superior to the last match I reviewed them in. However, it was bogged down by not just the interference, which I would have allowed the interference to go by because I think it worked in context of the story, but their rationale for it didn't make any sense. The fact that Sting was the one who's going to be DQ'd, even though Luger hit Sting, so Sting should have been the one to win by disqualification. Anyway, be that as it may, it is an improvement over when I saw Bret take on Wolfpack Sting a while ago on this channel, but yeah, it gets bogged down a little bit by one of the many times you see a run-in. After the match, some sportsmanship between Bret and Sting, and then backstage, Mean Gene's interviewing Chris Benoit about his upcoming final title match with Bret Hart, and Benoit says it's an honor to wrestle him for the title. Last time they fought, it was for Owen, and tonight it's for recognition. Combat collected, solid promo by Benoit here. Elsewhere, Tenay interviews Lex Luger, who's suddenly wearing a neck brace. He says he was too beat up by Bret's bat attack just moments before, but it says he'll write a check to every single fan disappointed that he won't be able to wrestle tonight. Must have been a cheap night for Luger. Chain match up next as Vampiro is accompanied by Jerry Only of the Misfits takes on Berlyn with "That's the Wall, brother." By the way, Berlyn is Alex Wright's new persona after having listened to one Rammstein CD. Before the match begins, though, we hear the Oklahoma Fight song, very familiar tune for us wrestling fans, but out comes Dr. Death Steve Williams, who's accompanied by Oklahoma. Yes, folks, this is Ed Ferarra, Vince Russo's co-writer, doing a Jim Ross impersonation, complete with a facial contortion to resemble Bell's palsy. Oh boy, licensed to print money, am I right? You know, it's one thing if they want to have someone do a Jim Ross impersonation with, you know, the voice and the cowboy hat and coming out with a bottle of barbecue sauce and hanging out with Dr. Death Steve Williams and calling him his boy and everything. That's fine. And, you know, I'll admit, when he's on commentary in this next matchup, like, his JR-isms are hilarious. He's doing the impression, he's, you know, Vampiro, Vampiro, someone stop the damn match. Like, that stuff's pretty funny. It's like, it serves no purpose, and there's no way it's going to draw money or lead to anything noteworthy, but what I think what really puts it over the edge and makes this kind of like in bad taste is the fact that Ed Ferarra is contorting his face like he has Bell's palsy. That's super below the belt. It does nothing for the character. It does nothing for wrestling or the product. It's just such a weird, out of nowhere, esoteric, you know, it's such an inside baseball kind of thing for them to be making fun of JR for no real reason. That's the thing. It's, oh, he's the competition, so we got to make fun of him. And, you know, and Vince Russo and Ferrara have both said they've apologized and JR's accepted, and it's water under the bridge now. It's in the past. Fine, but it doesn't mean you can't point out how fucking stupid this gimmick is. But back to the matter at hand, for whatever reason, before the match officially begins, Berlyn knocks out the referee with the chain, and soon everyone's in the ring. We see Vamp fighting the wall in the ring, and Berlyn ties Jerry Only to the barricade with some tape. Oklahoma makes up some football stats for the wall, saying he played for the University of Germany. Vamp and the wall are chained together now for some reason. Berlyn doesn't want Wall to make the cover, though. Wall shoves the collar onto Berlyn and walks off. What's with this tension here? Jerry Only back in the ring, and he and Vamp double team Berlyn. No one's wearing the chain anymore. Vampiro puts Berlyn in a camel clutch with a chain assist. Berlyn taps out. Good thing this match is over, but we're not done yet, though, as Dr. Death gets in the ring, beats up Vampiro and Jerry Only, and now the match is over. Oh, fiddle-dee-dee. I give this one 0 stars out of 5. What a huge clusterfuck this match was, just everywhere, on every level, not just the nonsense going on in the ring, but whatever the stuff was going on ringside with Oklahoma and Steve Williams. And the reason I'm giving it a 0-star match is because, well, I gave the Renegade matches 0 stars out of 5 a while ago, and there's no way this match is better than those. Backstage, Mike Tenay's with the champ, Scott Hall. He's already the U.S. champion, but apparently last week on Nitro, he was awarded the TV title by the powers that be because Rick Steiner couldn't defend it anymore due to injury. So why did Hall just automatically get the belt? It's never really explained. Something powers that be, basically. In his promo, he says he's giving an open challenge to anyone who wants to challenge him for both those belts later tonight. Elsewhere backstage, Curt Hennig makes the long walk down the hallway. We then cut to see Kimberly arriving in the arena. Boy, is she late or what? Up next, the Total Package takes on the man called Meng. 2 weeks ago on Thunder, Luger beat the hell out of Meng with a tire iron, including a shot right to the head. The following Monday, Meng helps Sting advance the title tournament by applying the Tongan death grip to Luger mid-torture rack. And neck injury or no, Luger is forced by the powers that be to wrestle Meng. Luger, despite having a supposedly debilitating neck injury, still able to throw Meng around with a suplex or two. Shivani on commentary going, you know, I'm beginning to think the whole thing's a charade. And sure enough, you know, it's kind of a strategy by Luger here because Meng goes the Tongan death grip, but the neck brace blocks it. Luger makes his comeback with a clothesline. Luger tries to ram Meng's head into the turnbuckle, which of course is the wrong thing to do, Lex. Meng's got Luger draped over the rope, and Liz takes an awful long time to get something set up. It's some kind of mace or pepper spray, but she accidentally sprays Luger in the face. I would say that since Meng is so close to it, he's also affected by it, but as has been established in the previous canon, pepper spray has no effect on our boy Meng here. Meng removes the neck brace, the Tongan death grip, pins and beats Luger. I give it 1 star out of 5. It's already a slow, plotting match between two guys who don't work that well together. Like, I think Luger's best opponents are guys who are more agile, more technical, more graceful, and graceful is certainly a word you would not use to describe Meng. Meng is a good worker, and he's pretty versatile depending on who he's working with, but this does not work. These guys do not mesh well, and it's bogged down by a very awkward finish. Backstage, Mean Gene's interviewing Bret Hart about the title match later on. He says, friendship with Benoit aside, it's all about the title he's worked for the last 2 years to get. Lex Luger walks through his shot for some reason, calling for Elizabeth. We then see David Flair. Is he jerking off? No, he's just polishing his crowbar, which incidentally is the phrase I use to describe jerking off. It's time for Scott Hall's open challenge for both the US and TV championships. Scott Hall does the hey yo. He says that Big Kev's on his way here. Again, we're more than 2 hours into the show. Better late than never, I guess. So who will answer Scott Hall's open challenge? We hear Booker T's theme for like a half second. We get some awkward silence, and then we hear it again. For reals this time, Booker T is the one answering the open challenge. Crowd's big into Hall's shtick here, the promo, the crotch chopping, the toothpick throw. It's really the loudest these guys get for the majority of the show, except for the opening match with Benoit and Jarrett. Bit of rough cutoff in the corner by Hall there. Hall looks over Booker T as the crowd is suddenly very interested in something happening way elsewhere in the arena. Jarrett and friends return. Booker makes his comeback. Jarrett distracts the ref as creative control enter the ring. Booker disposes of the two twins, but in his distraction, Scott Hall recovers, hits the outsider's edge, and wins. Womp womp. I give this one 2 stars out of 5. It's a match that could have been better, and I think it was done well enough, but again, these repetitive, endless run-ins, and I'm going to be saying it a lot because we're seeing it a lot. It's the ruination of so many matches we see on this night. Again, Hall and Booker T can be a great match on paper. This was not it, specifically because it was kind of short, first of all, didn't really get into the second gear, and then the interference at the end kind of bogged it down. After the match, the lights cut out and come back up. It's Midnight, the recently debuted Lady Muscle for Harlem Heat. She and the twins do a dance. Let's see her taking them out of the ring, and that's pretty much where that ends there. As for Scott Hall, he wouldn't be the champ for very long because very soon after this, he would actually throw the TV championship in the trash on television. Now, this is very interesting because he threw the belt away in Denver, Colorado in mid-November. By mid-February, we see Jim Duggan pulled out of the trash in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Your guess is as good as mine. Lex Luger still on the hunt for Miss Elizabeth. Then we go to our next match as David Flair takes on Kimberly. Now, last month, David Flair was hit on by Kim, but it turns out he was spurned in favor of his father, Rick. This apparently drove David Flair to complete madness, if the hype package is to be believed. So he begins stalking Kimberly and threatening her with a crowbar and stuff, beating people up like DDP and whatnot. Kimberly even hits David with a car at one point, trying to get him off her back. Wait, who here is the babyface? Kimberly makes her way to the ring, not dressed to wrestle, and not looking overly concerned about her predicament. Earlier in the match, we get an awkward low blow by Kimberly, but David no-sells it. He just punches himself in the dick because apparently he's wearing a cup. David grabs the crowbar and just bludgeons Nick Patrick right in the face with it. He stands over Kim ready to strike, but then she tries to seduce him, grabbing the front of his pants. But she pulls out the cup, hits him with a dick kick yet again, then a shitty kick to his head, more kicks to the ribs. Kimberly's on top and begins slapping and choking David. David shoves her off and Kimberly begs off once again. Finally, Canyon appears in his very ill-fitting shirt and makes the save. Tony even plugs the fact he's off filming Ready to Rumble, don't remind me. David keeps no-selling. He taps Canyon in the balls of the crowbar as DDP comes in and beats up David too. Diamond Cutter, shoulders back, chest out, at ease. Then to top it all off, Arn Anderson appears and tells DDP to back off. Arn, of course, is a longtime friend of the Flair family. David decks Arn from behind with a crowbar too. Whose side is he on? David then lumbers out of the ring like a zombie and escapes to the crowd. What a poor use of former US champion David Flair. What can I say? Fuck this match and everyone involved. 0 stars. After the dust settles though, Arn gets on the stretcher and is carted off. Very serious vibe they're going with here. A perfect juxtaposition with the take it off chant we were hearing from the crowd. I'm guessing there's some pretty lady in the audience and they wanted to show the goods. At this point, I don't blame them. In your semi-main event, Goldberg takes on Sid Vicious in an I Quit match. Now, Halloween Havoc, Goldberg beat Sid due to referee stoppage after beating the piss out of Sid and making him bleed buckets. As mentioned earlier, Goldberg would show up at the end of the night, though, to challenge Sting in that non-sanctioned match. After the show is over, though, Sid claims that Goldberg said I quit during the match, but very clearly it's a very bad recording of Sid saying I quit over the match.
I quit!
It's basically a ripoff of what they did with Mankind and The Rock at the Rumble in '99, but done much worse. And the thing is, it makes Sid a total idiot, but no one challenges him on it. They don't acknowledge it on commentary or anything about that, but that's what led to this match, basically. Before the match, backstage, Sid Vicious says it's inconceivable that he would say I quit to Goldberg. He stands by what he said about him claiming that Goldberg said I quit in their last match, and history will repeat itself tonight. Goldberg with the attack early on, some big Goldberg sucks chants from the crowd. I think I'll also hear a Gilbert chant as well.
The
then again, the human body as we know it is nothing like what.
Sid now on top of Goldberg, punching away at him. 2 big choke slams in a row by Sid. Goldberg somehow comes back and starts chopping away at the big man. Many punches and grunts later, Goldberg still going at it and the crowd's getting restless. Goldberg applies a Cobra clutch. Sid passes out in the hold and the referee calls it, even though Sid never actually said, "I quit." You know, I give them 1.5 stars. Kudos for a clean finish, a rarity in this show, but you know, the match is nothing special. Like I said, 2 guys whose styles don't necessarily mesh all that well. It's power versus power, and neither man's really agile or athletic enough to really pull it off and make it look good. Goldberg is the more agile one by default, but that's not really saying much. But yeah, 2 guys just didn't really mesh well in this matchup, and Goldberg wins pretty decisively in, not that great a match. Backstage, Lex Luger warns Liz she better watch her back after what happened earlier. Yikes. Then we go to the main event, the finals of the WCW Championship Tournament, as Chris Benoit takes on Bret the Hitman Hart. 2 Canadians wrestling in Canada for the vacant World Championship. On paper, you could not write up a better finals for this tournament. It just makes so much sense. It's really cool. Let's see how they fuck it up. The match begins at a nice slow pace, bit of a feeling out process. Suddenly the fan with the flag who attacked Dean Malenko earlier shows up again at ringside. He hits Benoit with the flagpole on the outside and reveals himself to be Dean Malenko, attacking his former friend in Benoit. So did he beat up the fan to get the outfit then, or what? Bret decks Dean, and what a sell by Dean from that punch. I love it. Security escorts Dino out and the match resumes. The crowd is totally dead for all this going on, by the way. Benoit lights up Bret with some chops and takes him down. Bret goes for a tilt-a-whirl, but Benoit counters into a jumping tombstone pile driver, which you'll never see him do in the Federation. Flying headbutt, and you know what, folks? You'll never guess what happens next. Are you ready for this? Are you ready for the ground shaking, the earth shattering thing that happens next? More outside interference, baby, yeah! Out come Hall and Nash. Hooray! Hall knocks out the referee and the Outsiders enter the ring. Goldberg appears and spears Nash. The Outsiders begin to flee. They have a tussle with Goldberg on the stage. What the actual fuck is happening? Back in the ring, the match is still going on. The referee's letting a lot of this go. Benoit's working Bret's leg here. More distracted crowds as Bret begins to make his comeback on Benoit. Chris counters a suplex into the ring and busts out a couple Germans. Bret fights out of the crossface attempt and gets the sharpshooter locked in. Benoit taps out and Bret Hart finally wins the WCW Championship as garbage begins to get thrown in the ring. I think it's happy garbage, though, as opposed to like angry garbage when the New World Order formed. Afterwards, Bret and Benoit hug it out. Bret celebrates with his wife and kids. He waves the Canadian flag that Dean Malenko defaced by wiping his face paint all over it as we fade to black. Even if you don't take in all the interference with Dean Malenko and the Outsiders and Goldberg into account, the match itself I don't think is as good as their Owen tribute match from a few months before this. I think this one doesn't flow as well. The drama's not as good. I think that the crowd being dead at this point really helps like drag the energy from this matchup. But also I think, then the aforementioned run-ins with everyone else getting involved. That knocks it down considerably. It's just more overbooked garbage on top of more overbooked garbage. But the silver lining is Bret Hart finally has a championship after being in the company for 2 years and not getting a whiff of that belt. So really cool to see him win the championship in Canada, in the same country where he lost the WWF Championship in the Montreal Screwjob. So for him to win the championship here is a great full circle moment, just in time for him to get concussed by Bill Goldberg in their match at Starrcade in December, which would ultimately lead to Bret Hart relinquishing the belt and then ultimately retiring due to those concussion injuries. As far as Chris Benoit goes, he would fight Dean Malenko the next night in a flag match on Nitro, which Malenko would actually beat him in, but Benoit would recover pretty nicely in January after Bret relinquished the belt. The title was up for grabs at Sold Out 2000, and the main event was Benoit versus Sid. Benoit wins the match under somewhat questionable circumstances, but he is the champion for one whole day before he relinquishes the belt, and then he and Dean Malenko and Perry Saturn and Eddie Guerrero jump ship to the World Wrestling Federation, and the Radicals are born. For Vince Russo's maiden voyage on pay-per-view as the head of creative that past Halloween Havoc, it's a work in progress. There's a lot that needs to be worked on here. Of the 12 matches that we see on this show, one is good. That's the Benoit Jarrett match to open the thing. And then there's a couple of matches that are on the bubble, but then are brought down by one of the many, many times we see all this fucking interference. And everything else on the show is like decent at absolute best, horrible at worst. Not every day you get a show show with 2 0-star matches on this show, but here we are. It's bad enough that almost every match on this show had some kind of screwy finish or some wacky interference in the middle of it, but I think what you can do as a company to soften the edge on all the interference is to have the announcers, the messengers to the audience at home, try and have them explain it to the viewers. But based on everything I've watched from like 99 and 2000 WCW, they don't. They don't explain it to fans. They are just as clueless as everyone else, and boy, it shows. And the whole thing just really suffers. The endless run-ins, interference, it is so boring and so predictable and just bogs down the entirety of the show, which is ironic because run-ins, in theory, are supposed to make things more unpredictable. But when you put it in every single match or almost every match, then yeah, it's just not a fun time to watch. It was a slog getting through the show. It took me 2 days to get through this like sub 3-hour show because of how repetitive everything was. I thought Bash the Beach 2000's bad. It's still bad, but this one's right below there, right down there in the muck with Bash the Beach 2000. But despite all that, I hope you enjoyed my review of Mayhem 99. If you want to play a role in determining which shows I look at, be they good, bad, or somewhere in between, go to patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret, become a $10 backer or above, and you'll have the chance to nominate classic shows for me to review. And the next time on the classic segment, I didn't really plan on doing this, but right now I kind of want to wash the taste out of my mouth from this bad Russo show and look at what many consider to be a good Russo show. Like I mentioned at the top of this review, it's one of the crowning achievements of Vince Russo's time as a head writer in any federation, and just without having looked at it again in a long time, just going off memory and hindsight, one of my personal favorite pay-per-views, it's Survivor Series 1998. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.